Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today, 53-man projected roster. Tomorrow is the deadline, 4 p.m. 27, 28 players are going to be losing their jobs. Really unfortunate, but the Giants need to cut down a lot of players to get to this final roster. And for the most part, we got a lot of ups and downs yesterday against the New England Patriots. We saw struggles on the offensive line. We saw Daniel Jones make some bad decisions, some great throws as well. The one to Caden Smith on the seam route was phenomenal. The defense looked good. We held the Patriots to just 6 points in the first half. And altogether, there was some really great individual performances. But sometimes it's not enough to make the roster. And we want to break down some of these specific units, really all of the specific units, to give you an idea of what this roster is going to look like. Some last-second players that may have squeaked onto the roster, may have missed the cut. But we really want to dive into this, Anthony. But before we do, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing real good, and I'm excited for Final Cut Day. I think that's a really exciting time. During the NFL season, it's the culmination of the preseason. All of these players that have worked really hard all summer. Some of them are going to earn their spot. Others are not going to be as lucky. It's going to be a day where you see a lot of players, unfortunately, lose their jobs, might not make it back to the league. So, you got to feel for those players, but also have to feel really excited for the players that do make it. Back end of a roster players who maybe at first didn't really have much of a chance, but they worked really hard and they did make it. You think of names on the Giants in particular, guys like Raymond Johnson, who might make this roster. David Moa might make this roster. Rodarius Williams, some people might not have even expected him to make the roster as a 6th-round pick. Giants did cut their 6th-round pick last year, Chris Williamson. If he makes a roster, that's amazing. Guys like that, David Sills as well. There's so many names and small, lesser-known players that you're just rooting for during this time. And tomorrow, it's the culmination of it all. We'll see just who makes the roster, who doesn't. And of course, once players start to get cut, then they go down the waiver wire, and the Giants might be able to scoop up some offensive line depth or depth at another position through the waiver wire. Just a very exciting time as we prepare for the regular season.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it with the quarterbacks. And I think we can pretty much come to the conclusion that Daniel Jones and Mike Longneck Glennon will be the quarterbacks for the Giants, that first and second string. They may have, Brian Lewerke, however you say his last name, on the practice squad. And I think that's probably where he will land. The Giants always like to have a quarterback on the practice squad. They had Clayton Thorson last year. But Daniel Jones, Mike Glennon, do you disagree? I think those are pretty much the guaranteed 2 quarterbacks, right?
I don't think they need a third quarterback. I think they're going to practice squad a quarterback, which is always a good idea. But yeah, only 2 on the active roster is all I need to see, Jones, Glennon. And I actually really like Glennon as a backup, so I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, last night he actually didn't look too bad as the backup quarterback. He made some nice throws. One to Damian Wills that was actually a phenomenal throw on the boundary. He toe tapped his feet in. But let's move over to the running backs now. Saquon Barkley, Devontae Booker, and this is the big question mark here: Gary Brightwell or Corey Clement. I actually really like Corey Clement. I think he has some nice juice behind his runs. I think he's a good receiving back. He offers you kind of versatility in a couple different spots. But the Giants did just draft Gary Brightwell in the 6th round. They probably don't want to give up on him just yet. They don't estimate using Corey Clement that much to begin with. So Gary Brightwell will probably make the roster simply because, he was a draft selection. I like Corey Clement. I think that I would even be fine signing him to the roster, the 53-man, and then putting Gary Brightwell on the practice squad. There's just so many running backs around the league. Most likely, no one's going to pick up Gary Brightwell out of Arizona. But again, the Giants aren't really in the business of drafting players and then cutting them immediately, unless you're Ryan Connolly, of course. But I think the Giants, this is an interesting conversation to have, Anthony. Do you think that Gary Brightwell makes this roster because of that, because he's a draft pick? Or do you think the Giants look at him and say, you know what, we actually like Corey Clement a lot more. It's a 6th-round pick anyway. Put him on the practice squad, and we'll see what goes from there. I don't think anybody that late in the draft is a guaranteed roster guy. But at the end of the day, they did keep all of them last year. Carter Coughlin, although they did cut Chris Williamson, the cornerback from the 7th round. So that's an interesting point to make. Gary Brightwell could very much land on the practice squad. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I don't think Gary Brightwell makes his final roster. I haven't seen him stand out enough in practice. I didn't really see him do anything that spectacular during the preseason. And I saw Corey Clement run the football pretty damn well during the preseason. So I do think that Corey Clement makes this roster. I think it is Saquon is number 1, Devontae Booker is number 2, and Corey Clement is number 3. I do think that they put Gary Brightwell on the practice squad. There's no reason not to. Plus, there are just so many running backs around the league. I doubt anybody else scoops him up by the time he gets through the waiver wire. He should end up on the Giants practice squad because he is a draft pick. Might as well keep the homegrown talent and not move elsewhere for another running back. But I think they hold 3 running backs, and I think that Corey Clement is number 3. Gary Brightwell is my personal odd man out in this scenario.
Yeah, I think I want to be on the same boat as you. I think I really like Corey Clement. I like what he offers. I think he can actually get more involved than just being a third string running back. I think that having him as a dual threat with Saquon, since he has the receiving abilities, could be something interesting they can do, especially since they're going to be trying to mitigate fatigue. And at the same time, you also have the fullbacks, and Elijah Penny can also run the football. So, this is an interesting scenario because the Giants could end up being one of the only teams in the NFL to carry 2 fullbacks with Elijah Penny and Cullen Gillespie. And Cullen Gillespie essentially is a special teams ace. That is what he does. He blocks punts. He's all over the field on the special teams unit. But do you really need 2 fullbacks? Probably not. I'm going to go with keeping Elijah Penny, cutting Cullen Gillespie. And with that being said, I think that extra roster spot from cutting him will go towards the wide receivers, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. But just to finalize things at the running back position, I'm going with Saquon Barkley, Devontae Booker, Corey Clement, Gary Brightwell is headed towards the practice squad. Are you in the same boat as that? Or do you think he's making this team? I know you said you didn't think so.
No, I think Corey Clement makes the roster. I think Gary
Okay,
Brightwell
cool.
goes to the practice squad. And then at fullback, I think they carry 1. I understand the whole idea behind Cullen Gillespie because he is a special teams ace, but we've also seen Eli Penny block a punt before against the Arizona Cardinals in 2019, I believe it was. So I think that I'm pretty comfortable with Eli Penny working on the special teams, as well as I love the way he runs the football, and I love the way that he provides kind of like a blanket in the receiving game as a fullback, because he is like a security blanket. He is a really good player who can do it all. He's a good blocker, good runner, and good receiver. Great fullback that I think the Giants have. I think he's actually a really underrated player on this team. So he's the only fullback that I need because I feel like he does it all.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Elijah Penny does have that versatility so that the Giants don't necessarily need 2 fullbacks. And with that being said, you save a roster spot there. Some people have those 2 fullbacks on the roster. Then you go over to wide receivers, right? You have Kenny Galladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slay, and Kadarius Toney, John Ross, and CJ Board. Those are pretty much the guaranteed 6 players. I'd say CJ Board, being that he's an average receiver and yes, special teams, utilizations, I think that he makes this team because of that. John Ross, you already guaranteed him $1 million without touching the field, so I think he automatically is getting a chance here too. But because you let that second fullback go and Cullen Gillespie, I now think that the Giants use that spot towards the wide receivers. I think David Sills makes this roster. I think he's done enough. They need a big body, 6'4", guy who can high point passes to back up Kenny Galladay so that they don't have to change their scheme, right? Anytime an injury happens, you don't want to have to change your scheme too much. So I think that he offers that value behind Kenny Galladay. Would you agree with me there? Do you think David Sills makes this roster because we axed Cullen Gillespie from this list?
Yeah, and I think that, there's a couple other spots on the roster as well that I might axe some players that Jordan Rannon or other people might not. But I do think David Sills makes the roster. I think the Giants hold 7 receivers, and one of the primary reasons why has almost nothing to do with David Sills. I think it has a lot to do with the injuries at the wide receiver position. Darius Slayton came away from yesterday's preseason game a little bit hobbled. Kenny Galladay is still a little bit hobbled. Sterling Shepard has had seasons where he's hobbled the entire year, and then of course John Ross is the same way, where he's had seasons where an injury has lingered for the entire year. So talking about your first 4-5 receivers are all dealing with injuries or have dealt with injuries that have kept them out for significant pieces of time in the past. So I think that it's smart to hold 3 reserve receivers. Why not? Kadarius Toney as well is dealing with an injury. So there's just so many injuries at the receiver position. Why not keep a couple extra healthy receivers on the roster? I think that's a main selling point that not enough people are talking about. You look at all of the starting receivers, all of them have been dealing with injuries. So let's keep 2 extra receivers on the roster. I think CJ Board is a pretty good receiver. He's nothing special, but he's a decent enough receiver to go out there and contribute some good snaps. And he also contributes on special teams pretty well. And then David Sills, I think, is a good receiver. I like the way that he runs routes. I think he's got a good release. I like his frame. I think he does a good job with contested catches. And he has an excellent connection with Daniel Jones, considering how much those two have worked together this offseason. He's earned the roster spot in my books, so he's going to be on my final 53 projection. And I do think that the Giants hold 7 wide receivers.
I agree. I think David Sills makes this team for the things you listed. The chemistry has a Daniel Jones. He followed him around this offseason like a puppy dog. And Joe Judge loves players with good work ethic, right? He loves guys that are just willing to put it on the line, do whatever it takes. This is what Julian Edelman used to do with Tom Brady, by the way. He would just follow him around all offseason. They would train together. And I think he saw a little bit of that with David Sills. David Sills probably asked him, how do I make this team? What do I have to do? And Joe Judge was like, you have to become better. You have to have the best chemistry. And keep in mind, David Sills didn't play the first half yesterday, so he didn't actually have any reps with Daniel Jones. He only was on the field when Mike Glennon was on the field. So if it comes down to it, they want to get David Sills involved during the regular season due to injury or whatever reason, mitigating fatigue. His chemistry with Daniel Jones is already there. It already exists. And I think that's something that, is beneficial. I think Dante Pettis had a couple of nice plays. He dropped one diving catch yesterday, but for the most part, I think David Sills just did enough. Dante Pettis is a good receiver. Somebody will pick him up and be happy about it. But David Sills has worked his way onto this roster, and I want guys who are going to put in that effort to make it. So 7 receivers here: Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Kadarius Toney, John Ross, CJ Board, and David Sills Army. So those are your 7 receivers. Let's go over to tight ends really quickly. Unfortunately, Evan Ingram had a strained calf in yesterday's game. Who knows how long that could keep him out? It could keep him out anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks. Nobody really knows. He walked off under his own power. He did look a little bit frustrated after, so it could be something more serious. Who knows? We'll find out. And as soon as we do, we'll have some information for you guys as always. But for now, let's talk about these 4 roster spots for the tight end position, right? So you have Evan Ingram, of course, Caden Smith, of course. He had a beautiful catch. And Kyle Rudolph as your third guy. And some might say Jake Hausman. They have Griffin Stewart. And at the end of the day, I actually think the Giants might end up letting Jake Hausman go, Griffin Stewart go, and picking up another tight end off the waiver wire, because there are a lot more options out there that are probably better than those. And of course, we don't have Levine Toilolo after he tore his Achilles. So I think that the Giants probably wait, see what tight ends hit the market. They might pick one up and fill that 4th spot. There's a couple of good ones. Tight end, for whatever reason, is a very, very deep position in the NFL. There's a lot of good options, and I think they will find a good player to be that 4th string guy. But again, they don't really expect him to be on the field that much. And just to be factual about this, Evan Ingram going down sucks, but I'm pretty confident that Caden Smith and Kyle Rudolph can easily supplement his loss. I think that they're like exactly what Jason Garrett loves in tight ends. I don't even think Jason Garrett knows how to use Evan Ingram. He's used to the Jason Wittens of the world and whatnot. I mean, Evan Ingram sitting down in the middle of the field all last season was exactly how you should not use Evan Ingram. So I think he wanted a Kyle Rudolph type of receiver. I think he got one, and I think we're actually going to see a little bit more out of these guys. So, Anthony, what are you thinking about this? Evan Ingram, Caden Smith, Kyle Rudolph, Jake Hausman, Griffin Stewart. Maybe they cut those guys and then get someone off the waiver wire.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking is that the Giants do hold 4 tight ends. I know some people originally had them holding 3, but after the Evan Engram calf strain, pretty much everybody's going to have them holding 4 tight ends on this roster, and I think that is the smart move. Even before the Evan Engram injury, I thought they would hold 4 for the simple reason that Jason Garrett actually loves to run 13 personnel, 12 personnel. You need a lot of tight ends in this offense. This offensive scheme requires you to have extra tight ends on your roster, just because there are times where the Giants have 3 tight ends out there, and if someone is injured and can't go out there, but they still want to run their 13 personnel, you need one extra backup tight end to go out there and run that 13 personnel. I'm pretty sure the Giants ran more 13 personnel than any team in the NFL last season. So I expect them to hold 4 tight ends and not put all 3 of their tight ends on the roster out at once when they go into 13 personnel. There should be some sort of backup in that scenario. So thing that I'm thinking of, Tanner Hudson, he was just cut by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was their leading receiver this preseason, and they waived him anyway, but he could be a potential name to keep an eye on. I don't think that any of the tight ends on the roster behind our top 3 make it, just because I don't think they're too impactful. I thought Ryzen John would have been like the perfect player because he looked really impressive in the second preseason game. Unfortunately, he's injured, was put on injured reserve. His season's now over. He'll get another chance next year. But for now, I think that the Giants are going to cut the other 2, Hausman, Griffin Stewart, and I think that they go ahead and find another tight end on the waiver wire.
I completely agree, and I think that's the right way to approach this, tight end position, because Hausman didn't show enough for me. Griffin Stewart didn't show enough. In fact, I saw more drops than catches. So I think that Tanner Hudson, a guy who's coming from a Bucs organization, just won a Super Bowl, obviously has a very good coaching staff, obviously has very good players around him. I think he's a guy that would come in here and probably be be the number 4 tight end and would offer some value as a pass catcher at the very least as he gets acclimated with this scheme and roster. So we have 4 tight ends there. We think that personally, and I think Anthony's in the same boat, they will not keep any of their tight ends on the board now. What might end up happening is they might keep a guy like Jake Hausman, and then they might cut him in a couple days after the waiver claims go in, and maybe they get another tight end, and maybe they just release and swap. So that's something to keep an eye on, but they will be keeping 4 tight ends after Evan Ingram's injury. Let's go over to the offensive line, where this is probably the most interesting of the units. You have Andrew Thomas, Matt Pert, Nate Solder, Will Hernandez, Shane Lemieux, Chad Slade, Kenny Wiggins, Nick Gates, Jonathan Harrison. So you have 9 guys there. And then you have Ted Larson. I think Ted Larson and Chad Slade could be interchangeable. We'll see about that. I think Jonathan Harrison makes this roster because you need a center behind Nick Gates. But again, there's some guys on the waiver wire as well. Or even, there are guys that will be cut. The Giants can probably go out and find someone. But I will say there are also trade candidates. You could go out and trade for somebody mid-season, or alternatively, you could do something like this. You could go and look at David DeCastro at free agency and say, hey, for the most part, you didn't want to be here during training camp. You wanted to skip preseason, probably wanted to keep his body fresh. Think about how many guys retired because their bodies just couldn't handle preseason and training camp this year. A guy like David DeCastro probably was mulling retirement and saying, you know what, instead, I'll just cash in once the season begins and I'll skip training camp and everything. He would be probably a pretty good guy for the Giants to target if he's willing to make a comeback that wouldn't cost him any draft capital or player value. So that's something to keep in mind, Anthony. What are you thinking about this offensive line?
Yeah, I don't know if they necessarily hold a 9. And the reason that I say that, not to sound kind of like super pessimistic, but why would you hold 9 of these bums, right? Our offensive line is so bad. Why would you keep 9 of these players that are on this roster right now around? Like, you got to cut some of these guys. I think that they hold 8 ultimately. Nate Solder is your backup tackle on both sides of the line. You get a backup center in Jonathan Harrison. And then I think you just need one backup guard. And I think they're going to find that via trade or the waiver wire. I really like this name, Michael Dunn from the Cleveland Browns. That's a player that I'm going to talk about in the upcoming Tony's Takes video. David DeCastro is also a pretty good player to keep in mind. Austin Reiter is another player to keep in mind in case they want to have Jonathan Harrison play guard and they want to have David DeCastro or Austin Reiter play center as the backup if he's willing to accept a backup role, right? But I don't know. I just don't see a need in holding 9 of these guys. I would like to hold 8, but I don't think 9 is necessary. And the 8th man, I think, should probably be a player not on this roster right now. I think any of the reserves on this team, really some of the starters even, should be moved on from. But, ultimately this offensive line is just a mess right now. And I think that the Giants need to try and make some sort of move somewhere to acquire some talent, at least some talented depth at the very least. And I think that's the whole idea there. That's why, again, I want to say his name one more time. I'm going to talk about him in a Tony's Takes episode. Michael Dunn from the Cleveland Browns. Giants had joint practices with the Browns this summer. They definitely got a close-up look at this guy. He had a phenomenal preseason. I think that he's a player, especially considering the starters that they have at guard. Michael Dunn is not projected to start. He's a backup for the Browns. He is probably going to be a hot commodity amongst the NFL for teams that are looking for a backup offensive lineman.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland just has a great offensive line to begin with. They also have Drew Forbes, who's another guy who was thought to be the starting left guard at one point.
He did get injured, though. So otherwise, I would
injured.
mention him, but he was injured in the final preseason game.
Okay. Was it a serious injury?
It was a knee injury. I don't know how serious, but if it's a knee injury, I mean, probably just don't want to even touch it.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens there. Maybe it's a guy they could bring in, and if it's not too serious, just ramp him up over the next couple weeks. They do have 2 weeks until the regular season starts to begin with. But this offensive line is a bit shaky, man. This position, it's always, we're sitting here like, where are they going with this, right? Andrew Thomas had himself a bad game yesterday. He had a couple of decent snaps. He had one good drive, the one that Daniel Jones threw that interception. That drive for Andrew Thomas was good. Matt Pert looked okay at times. He was about average. Nate Solder, he gave up a sack within like 20 snaps. So then again, you're still like, these tackle spots are still a big question mark going into the regular season, which is not good. Shane Lemieux still out with the knee injury, working his way back. Kenny Wiggins, I don't trust him. Ted Larson, definitely don't trust him. Nick Gates, he's pretty consistent. I think he'll get better as the season continues. And the one guy, and Anthony, I will take credit for this because I've been saying this for so long. I know it's not the regular season yet, but I've been saying that Will Hernandez, I think he was going to have a bounce back year. I think he's going to have a good year. And he did look phenomenal yesterday. He didn't give up a sack, didn't give up a hurry, didn't give up a pressure. He looked awesome. And I think that is a product of all the hard work he put in this offseason with Duke Manyweather. He thinned out. He got a little bit more agile. And I think that he's going to be our best offensive lineman this year over at right guard now. Anthony, are you thinking the same thing now, or are you still a little bit hesitant to jump on the bandwagon?
I'm on the bandwagon now. I got to say, Alex, you were right. I was pretty down on Will Hernandez. I was a little pessimistic. I didn't like his 3-year trend, the regression year to year to year. Did not like that at all. But it looks like he's going to have this bounce back year that we all hoped he would. Of course, I was always rooting for him. I just wasn't as confident in him as Alex was. But I do think that he's going to have that bounce back year. He's looked really good in the preseason. I was extremely impressed with him in the final preseason game, but I was also really impressed with him in the first preseason game. He was doing a great job getting out in front as a lead blocker in some of those power gap runs, and really just all around, he's had a great summer. He lost 20 pounds. He showed up to camp. He looked phenomenal. He's in the best shape that we've ever seen him in, and that's going to help him a lot, especially in terms of fitting into the scheme that utilizes a lot of lead blocking, pulling guards. So yeah, Will Hernandez, I'm super high on him right now. I think he's had a phenomenal summer, and I hope that he continues it into the fall and winter.
Yep, that's all we can hope for. And, for the most part, this is a offensive line that will probably go through some changes over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully they get better and better and better as the season progresses. But there are options if need be. The Giants have a ton of draft capital. We're going to talk about right now another player who they could use as potentially a trade piece. There are going to be some trades today. The Giants will probably be looking around. And one of them will be in the next unit that we are going to talk about, the defensive line, right? And just to overview, Andrew Thomas, Matt Pert, Nate Solder, Will Hernandez, Shane Lemieux, Chad Slade, Kenny Wiggins, Nick Gates, Jonathan Harris, and the Giants just simply can't afford to go without a ton of offensive line talent, because if they go thin there and one guy struggles and they have no supplements, they have no other options, it's going to be tough. I think Jake Burton, undrafted free agent, lands on the practice squad, so we'll see how that goes. But let's go over to the defensive line now. 5 players: Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Danny Shelton, Austin Johnson, and I think it's going to be David Moa who makes that last spot, because some people may say, how about BJ Hill? That's the player who didn't take a single snap in yesterday's preseason game. For what reason? Why on earth would Dexter Lawrence, all these guys, get snaps, but BJ Hill not get any snaps? I think they're trying to use him as a trade piece. I think they might be looking for offensive line support. They might be looking for, draft capital that they can use for offensive line support if need be. BJ Hill not getting any snaps is a big indication they're looking for trade partners. Anthony, are you thinking the same thing? And that's why I think David Moa makes this roster, because of it.
Yeah, it's funny you ask why might that have been, and it's funny to me because the day before this preseason game, I said we might see BJ Hill get traded or even cut because of his high cap hit. If they free him, they free $2.1 million in cap space, so they can free a ton of room for offensive line help or help somewhere else on the roster just by letting BJ Hill go. Plus, I think they have some pretty solid depth behind BJ Hill with David Moa and Raymond Johnson. So you said David Moa makes the roster in place of BJ Hill. I actually say that Raymond Johnson makes the roster instead. Both of those guys, though, are pretty good undrafted players who are really lesser known but had great summers. And neither one of them costs more than, I think, $800,000 in cap space. I think one is $800 and one is $600. So I don't remember which one is which, but neither one of them is $1 million in cap space. So when you free up BJ Hill, you're freeing up $2 million in cap space. You can absolutely go take that money, invest it in the offensive line, invest it in the secondary, invest it in the linebacker core. Wherever you want to invest that money, or maybe just hold on to it as insurance, you can do that. And I think that's the key here. And when you saw BJ Hill not line up at all, not play a single snap, despite being healthy scratch in the final preseason game is where these guys are making their final play for the roster. They're trying to get in on the roster. And I just don't think that he's on the roster right now if he's not playing in that final game. So I do think BJ Hill is going to get booted out of here one way or another. I think that they're going to try and trade him, use him as a trade piece, and that's why they were bubble wrapping him for the final game. Don't want him to go out there, get hurt, and then you can't trade him. I think they want to keep that option on the table and maybe move on from him. He's good enough to start on most teams in the NFL, in my opinion. Just the Giants have so much talent on the defensive line that BJ Hill has been used in a backup role. And I think that why keep him around in that backup role for starting level money? Just trade him, use one of these backup level money players as your backup, and I think those guys are pretty decent too. But I'm going with Raymond Johnson. I really like him. David Moe is
That's
good as
another
well. I
good
think you
one.
can't go wrong. But David Moe is also really, really young, 20 years old. Let's stash him on the practice squad and let Raymond Johnson get the first crack at it.
Yeah, that's also a very valid point. You're right. David Moa is like freakishly young, 20 years old. That's absurd for a guy of his size. And I think, practice squad option, not a bad idea. Raymond Johnson has flashed some potential this preseason and training camp. So I think you're right there. I think he will end up being that guy if they do end up training BJ Hill. But come on, not getting a snap, that's a pretty big indication to me that they'll probably have some alternative plans for him. So Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Danny Shelton, Austin Johnson, and we'll say Raymond Johnson as the fifth guy. But let's head over to outside linebacker, where they may keep six guys. Azeez Ojulari, Lorenzo Carter, Trent Harris, O'Shane Eximiz, Cam Brown, who's a good special teams player. And the last one could either be, this could be interesting. Okay, so there's three guys here: Nico Lalos, Effadio Denebo, and Ellerson Smith. Ellerson Smith hasn't had any reps, no training camp, no reps, no live action. There's probably a good reason to believe he's going to start the year on the PUP list, so he will miss the first 6 games of the season. Effadio Denebo, he's making a little bit too much for the lack of production he's offered. He really hasn't done much. Nico Lalos has some value on special teams. Trent Harris has looked really good so far. He had a sack yesterday. I think that this comes between Effadio Denebo and Nico Lalos, because Ellerson Smith, I imagine, will start on the PUP list and miss the first 6 games. So between Nico Lalos and Effadio, Anthony, who are you thinking? Lalos is clearly the cheaper of the two, and I think that he probably will make the roster because of that and his special teams
Yeah,
value.
well, if you remember on my final 53, ours have been a little bit different here and there as we go along through this. I'm saying they only hold 8 offensive linemen, and I think that the other position where we make up for that is probably here outside linebacker, and I do think Effadio makes it along with the guys that you mentioned. I do like what Nico Lalos provides in terms of his special teams ability. Trent Harris has absolutely earned the spot on this roster, in my opinion, and he's already listed ahead of Effadio on the unofficial depth chart. So yeah, I think Azeez, Lorenzo Carter, Trent Harris, Nico Lalos, O'Shane Eximiz. Cam Brown is also phenomenal on special teams. He was playing a lot of gunner this preseason, and he also had some really good reps as a pass rusher last season in the regular season. But that final spot, that 7th outside linebacker, I am going to go with Effadio Denebo there, since I sacrificed one of the offensive linemen for this position. Effadio is a pretty good player. I like what he provides. Let's keep in mind, only a few years ago, he was the leading pressure counter on the Minnesota Vikings. The dude knows how to get after the quarterback, and I'm excited to see him kind of get to work in a 2-point stance for the Giants. I do think he makes this roster as the 7th outside linebacker.
Yeah, and honestly, that could be the reason he's struggling, just having that transition to outside linebacker. He hasn't played that since high school, what he told us in an interview. So I think that might be a cause for his struggles this offseason. But again, he is being paid a little bit more than the average, back end outside linebacker. So they could be looking to save some cash there. We will see how that pans out. But I think that Nico Lalos, makes this roster. I think Effadio might be on the odd man out, unfortunately, because of that. And because I have 9 offensive linemen instead of 8. So I think they go with 6 outside linebackers. And I think they cut Effadio, unfortunately. But let's head over to inside linebacker, where this is a pretty much clear cut crew. I think Blake Martinez, Reggie Ragland, Tate Crowder, and Carter Coughlin are your pretty much guaranteed 4 inside linebackers. Devontae Downs, keep him as far away from MetLife unless he's playing for the Jets. That's the only way I want him near MetLife. The guy misses tackles, he misses assignments. The only thing he's good at is running full speed into offensive lines to just help other guys open up on stunts. That's the only thing he's good at doing. In pass coverage, absolute booty cheeks. In run stopping, booty cheeks. He's pretty much booty cheeks in everything. I don't want to see him on this team. Blake Martinez, Reggie Ragland, Tate Crowder, Carter Coughlin. Those are my 4 guys, Anthony. I imagine you're also on the same boat.
Those are my 4 guys as well. I don't really have any grievances with any of that. Devontae Downs, get him out of here. I'm sick of watching him play, miss tackles, and take horrible pursuit angles. I really don't see what the Giants see. I don't know how he's been on this team for as long as he has been, but I'm ready to see the Giants finally move on from him. Super excited with Carter Coughlin, Blake Martinez. Reggie Ragland has actually also looked really good in the preseason as a depth piece, and Tate Crowder, of course, as well. He was pretty good in his rookie season. So I'm good with these 4. Those are my 4. Those are your 4. Those are Jordan's 4. And I think that we're comfortable going into the season with them.
Yep, I would agree. So let's hover to cornerback. James Bradbury, Adoree Jackson, or Darius Williams, Darnay Holmes, and Keon Crossing. So this would assume that Josh Jackson does not make the roster. This would assume that Majay Harper doesn't make the roster. I know we already waived Quincy Wilson, so we don't really have an option there. James Bradbury, Adoree Jackson, or Darius Williams, Darnay Holmes, Keon Crossing. I think, you could categorize Julian Love as safety or cornerback, either or. This is interesting because you still have Aaron Robinson on the PUP list, so he's going to miss the first 6 games of the season too. At some point, the Giants are going to have to release somebody, whether it's a back end player or somebody that's injured. We'll find out in 6 weeks or really 8 weeks. But Anthony, you're looking at these guys. I think this is pretty much a guarantee for the most part. Bradbury, Jackson, Williams, Holmes, definitely making the roster. Keon Crossing, really good special teams player. Joe Judge loves Keon Crossing, spent time with him in New England, and he sees the value in having a very, very speedy gunner, whether it be or punt returner. Who knows how they're going to use him. But I think Majay Harper's the odd man out here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Keon Crosston, I think, is as guaranteed to make this roster as just about anyone, considering the Giants just traded a draft pick for him. So he's a lock for the roster in my eyes. I think that he is going to be a phenomenal gunner for the Giants, and that is what he's going to play. I don't think he does much returning, but I know that he has been a really good gunner throughout his NFL career. He can reach speeds of like 22.5 miles per hour on those plays where he's playing as the gunner, which is just like incredible. He's super speedy, and that kind of speed going downfield, not only just to make the tackle or get to the punt returner as soon as possible, but also when the ball is hanging in the air and you want to down it inside the 5-yard line. Now you got Keon Crossing who's just down there before anybody else. He can do that at a really high rate. So Keon Crosson's making this roster for sure as like the back end cornerback. I don't think he'll ever really need to go out there and play any cornerback. I think they're just going to kind of bubble wrap him from that and keep him on the special teams unit. I do think there's a chance that they hold 6 corners on the roster. Of course, Bradbury, Jackson. Rodarius is a lock for me. He's had a phenomenal summer, and he looked really good in the final preseason game. Darnay Holmes, lock, of course. Aaron Robinson on the PUP. If there's a cut somewhere else, maybe you can look at the Effadio Denebo. I put him on the roster. Maybe you can take him off and add another cornerback at number 6. That's actually a really good possibility because 5 corners, that might be a little thin. The Giants, especially considering Keon Crossing isn't really playing corner, and Aaron Robinson is also on the PUP list. And plus Adoree Jackson is also dealing with an injury. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Giants actually hold 6, whether that be Majay Harper or if they go out into free agency, the waiver wire, make a trade, whatever they got to do. I think there's a really good chance that the Giants actually hold 6 cornerbacks on this roster.
It's definitely possible. I mean, do they really want to just pretty much invest all of their potential in Rodarius Williams? I mean, I'm a big Rodarius Williams fan. He looked awesome yesterday in the preseason game, opposite James Bradbury. But I will say this, behind Williams, there's really nobody. They're going with Crossing if Jackson is out, so I do get what you're saying there. But again, it's important to remember they do have 4 safeties listed: Jabril Peppers, Logan Ryan, Xavier McKinney, and Julian Love. Julian Love can play that boundary corner. He can play slot corner. So he is categorized as a safety in this instance, just because you want to spread it around in the secondary a little bit. But I will say, I feel pretty comfortable if Julian Love has to supplement Jackson, if he's supplement Williams or Darnay Holmes, until Aaron Robinson makes a comeback. So we will see how this plays out. But safety, Jabril Peppers, Logan Ryan, Xavier McKinney, Julian Love, that is a pretty much guarantee. Unless you somehow think one of these guys should make it. In that case, I would probably call you a drug addict of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, the cornerback position, like I said, I do think that the Giants are going to go ahead and find someone else there. I think that they should hold 6. The more that I look at it, I'm probably leaning towards cutting Effadio and backtracking what I said earlier. I'd probably cut Effadio and then just add a 6 corner because the more I look at it, man, Adoree Jackson dealing with that foot injury.
You
James
do have
Bradbury
Love, though.
has
Keep that
been.
in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Julian Love is a defensive back. He does play all over the place. He plays in the slot. He plays out wide. But ultimately, I think they're going to want to have him play a lot more of that safety big nickel role. I don't know. I feel like it's typical for teams to hold 6 corners anyway. So I don't know. I just keep in mind injuries, Keon Crossing not really being a cornerback, being a gunner. I just think there's a really good chance that they hold 6. But I guess ultimately we'll find out tomorrow. But I think 6 cornerbacks is a pretty good projection.
Yeah, I would agree. The Giants like to have their secondary strong, and having those guys. I mean, just listing off the first 5 names in both Bradbury, Jackson, Jabril Peppers, Logan Ryan, Xavier McKinney. And remember, Logan Ryan can also play corner, so don't forget that too. So we have a ton of versatile talent that can do multiple things. And just to finish off, so this is the last 3 players of the 53-man roster, guaranteed pretty much, unless the Giants stumble upon, a really good punter. Graham Gano as your place kicker, Riley Dixon as your punter, and Casey Kreider as your long snapper. Those are pretty much guaranteed 3 specialists. Again, unless a punter somehow shakes loose like Johnny Hecker or something like that. I know the Rams were having a nice little competition at punter, but love me Johnny Hecker. Great player for pretty much his entire career. But that's the 53-man roster. So we'll just list off the names so that you get a good overview of all the players that we did name. Daniel Jones, Mike Glennon, Saquon Barkley, Devontae Booker. Anthony and I agreed on Corey Clement making this roster. Elijah Penny, Kenny Galladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Kadarius Toney, John Ross, CJ Board, David Sills, shout out David Sills, Evan Ingram, Caden Smith, Kyle Rudolph. Then they are going to keep a fourth tight end, whether it be Jake Hausman or Stephen Gruitt. I don't even know. Griffin Stewart. My God, the dyslexia just kicked in right there. But they could end up replacing one of those guys at the end with someone like Tanner Hudson from the Bucs, who they just released. So they will be going with 4 tight ends. Andrew Thomas, Matt Pert, Nate Solder, Will Hernandez, Shane Lemieux, Chad Slade, Kenny Wiggins, Nick Gates, Jonathan Harrison. So I have 9 offensive linemen. Anthony may have 8 there. Ted Larson, also another guy that could maybe replace Chad Slade, but I highly doubt it. Defensive line, Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Denny Shelton, Austin Johnson. We have Raymond Johnson because the Giants go and trade BJ Hill. Outside linebacker, Azeez Ojulari, Lorenzo Carter, Trent Harris, Nico Lalos, Ocean Ximenez, Cam Brown. They unfortunately let Effadio Denebo go, and Ellerson Smith is put on the PUP list, or he stays on the PUP list and misses the first 6 games of the season. Inside linebacker, Blake Martinez, Reggie Ragland, Tay Crowder, Carter Coughlin, pretty much guaranteed. Devontae Downs, please stay away. Cornerback, James Bradbury, Adoree Jackson, Rodarius Williams, my man, Darnay Holmes, Keon Crossing. And then you have at safety, Jabril Peppers, Logan Ryan, Xavier McKinney, Julian Love. Remember, Logan Ryan, Julian Love can both play cornerback if need be. Specialists, Graham Gano, Riley Dixon, Casey Kreider. Anthony, do you have any other thoughts on this 53-man roster? Obviously, tomorrow we'll have the full list. We'll be covering it throughout for you guys to make sure you know who's being cut, what's going on. We'll have a tracker on the website for you as well. Anthony, what are you thinking? Any last thoughts?
I'm excited to give the updates tomorrow. Honestly, we went through the whole roster. I don't think there's too much more to say. In terms of the specialists, I think when you think of special teamers, Keon Crosston as your gunner primarily. Cam Brown might be out there as well. I like Casey Kreider a whole lot as the long snapper. If there's anywhere that you want to make an upgrade, though, in the specialist department, it's probably at punter. I know that Riley Dixon sometimes looks really good. Sometimes he looks really bad. He's kind of very inconsistent. Maybe the Giants could try to find someone with a little bit more consistency, but ultimately, I think it's a little too late for that. I think Riley Dixon's going to make the roster as their final punter, and pretty much everything else that we listed is how I'm feeling right now. Could change by tomorrow, but I'm pretty confident in the 53-man roster that Alex and I just constructed.
And I as well. So guys, hopefully, you're looking at this list. A lot of things are about to change. We'll have you guys updated and everything, fresh and new for you guys tomorrow and throughout today. Maybe they will trade BJ Hill today. We'll see what that goes for. We'll see if they get an offensive lineman out of it, if they make some waiver claims, and I'm sure they will. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Fireside Giants. Make sure to subscribe below on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. As always, leave us a comment on YouTube if you have any other differences in your 53-man projected roster. I'd love to see where your head is at and if you have any differences. But make sure to subscribe as always, and we got you guys with all the news in the coming days. 2 weeks away, regular season. I'm hyped. Anthony's hyped. You're hyped. Let's get it, my friends. We'll catch you guys on the next New York Giants episode.